My name is Richard Medcalf. As Helen has probably said, I'm an executive coach and a team coach for high-level executives, mainly in tech or fast-changing companies where there's a lot of stress and change and complexity to navigate. And I'm also the host of the Impact Multiplier CEO podcast. And today, what I'd love to do is think about how this pretty crazy time that we're living in impacts the organizations that you run. And we've been through that initial adrenaline phase, right, where it's all hands to the pump. And the question that's really facing us is, how do we keep going, right? How do we actually keep employees motivated and productive and collaborative and creative, even in continuing uncertainty and confusion and fatigue? Let me give you a few examples. I was talking with a sales leader, and he was saying to me, and I was coaching him, and he was saying, look, Richard, how do I keep my sales team motivated? Because we're so far behind on our annual targets. You know, we know that we're not going to deliver those numbers, and it's taking us a fair bit of time to readjust those targets. Yeah, how do I keep my team motivated when they know they're already behind? Another executive was saying the problem in our organization is that we've got so much, we already were running flat out, and now we've added a whole bunch of COVID-19 projects and initiatives in addition to everything else that we were doing. So now everyone's even more overloaded. How do we help keep teams focused in that situation? And I was talking with the COO of a global tech company, another client, who said, you know, Richard, one of the best things that I found, one of the most impactful conversations that I used to have was in the taxi on the way back from a client meeting with a colleague. Perhaps, you know, I've flown out to a country, I'm working with them. We're coming back from a meeting and we do a debrief, you know, perhaps on the way to the airport before they drop me off. And that kind of informal reflection period and brainstorming, we've kind of lost in this new world. We're just moving from Zoom to Zoom or from Teams meeting to Teams meeting. And he said, I also need my teams to understand how they can have, he described it as 3D conversations in a 2D world, right? So how do we actually help the sales team win new logos, right, when they can't physically go and see people? How do we help internal teams collaborate well together and not just go into transactional turning of the wheel, turning the handle? So these are all questions, I think, which emerge as this uncertainty and turbulence kind of drags on. What I would love for you to do is perhaps jump into the chat box and, you know, type in, like, as we come onto this call, what would you love to get out of it, right? What's your situation, or what's a question that you're asking as you come into this call? I'm sure there's a whole bunch of different hopes or expectations or desires, but I'd just love to see a few, because obviously I've got my angle, but if you type in stuff into that chat, I'll be able to customize a little bit what I say to try to tackle some of the live issues on your plate right now. So perhaps just stop for a second whilst you find the chat window. If you make sure you send it to everybody. Thanks, a few things coming in. So yeah, being able to chat with others about the issues, how to keep teams motivated when working remote, stay connected as a team. Yeah, motivating ourselves. Yeah, it's a great one, Doug. Keeping our culture healthy when we can't touch and feel it, right? When we're all isolated, how do we maintain culture? Great things here: engaging staff, keeping teams together and communicating, engaging productivity. Okay, so keep them coming. This is great. It's really helpful. And what I'll do is we'll move forward, and let's try to. There's a variety of things here. Right? Let's see how far we can get in some of those. The first thing I'd like to suggest is that we adopt the snail, right? The snail is my favorite. I think it's becoming my mascot because I love going fast and I love having goals and objectives and tasks and rushing forward. And I'm just learning, as part of my own journey, really, that's when we slow down, we do speed up. So I'm going to encourage you right now. I know it's easy when there's all these other things to do, to be multitasking and everything else, but I invite you just to be present and listen with a couple of things in mind today. The first is to listen for insight and not for agreement. So I don't particularly care, in a sense, whether you agree with what I say today. It doesn't even matter. The question is, listen to find out what's the insight that's relevant for you right now. And it might be the insight comes from you disagreeing with me about something, and that's fine. And also be open to the fact that perhaps you might not be here for what you think you're here for. So the insight that you might get might not be about the thing which brought you onto this webinar in the first place. So let's slow down for a few minutes to speed up, and hopefully we'll get that insight, right? That thing that changes everything, the thing that changes our course, changes the way that we deal with each other, with teams. So I'm going to talk about three things, kind of the strategy question, the team and people question, and then our own personal leadership. Let me give you some language, first of all, to be able to anticipate and explain to the people around you what the journey is, right? What happens when we hit a crisis? There are really defined phases that you can actually see individuals, teams, and entire companies going through. And it's helpful to identify, where are you on this journey? Where are your team members or your people? Where are they? And perhaps people are at different places at different times. These are not hermetically sealed compartments. We might move around or even go backwards on this journey. Step one is react, right? This is the period we all know, right? It's when everything hits, right? The chaos hits, it's confusion. We go into survival mode, right? We're driven mainly by fear. We want to protect ourselves, our families, the business. Okay, we kind of go into survival mode. And we've all been through that at the early part of this year in many ways. And it's a high action, high adrenaline phase where as a leader, your job is really to react with that protective action and to reassure, right? There's a lot of fear around. And so lead with empathy, right? It's the time where people are going to remember, how did you show up as a leader? How much did you actually care for them as individuals in that challenging time? It's the chips are down, right? It's easy to talk about leadership when times are good. When times are hard, how do we act? Were we decisive? And do we bring empathy to the question? So that's the first phase, react. Now the second phase is reconfigure. And this is really marked by an energy drop. Okay, suddenly, okay, the panic station is over. People's productivity starts to drop, their energy drops, they're just feeling tired. This is dragging on longer than we thought. We haven't just bounced back. There's quite a lot of frustration around because people know they're not as productive as perhaps they feel they ought to be or should be or need to be. And so guilt around that. And the fundamental question that people really need to be asking in this time when the energy is low is, am I going to endure this period, or am I going to thrive in this period? And so if there's one question I'd encourage you to wrestle with for yourselves and your teams, it's like, well, what are we going to make a choice at this time? Do we want to endure or thrive? And in this reconfigure period, there's a couple of things to do, right? The first thing is to really understand what's changed, what's not changed, and where are we going to go next, right? What's important now? And in doing that, simplify. Right, this is a time when actually people are probably carrying over a hangover from the previous world, right, with all the different initiatives and things going on. What actually matters now? And we'll get onto that in a second. But what happens is that this is not the end of it. And there is a an intense period to come, and some people might already be in that, and I call that recommit. What happens there is everything starts to come back. Suddenly everyone's playing catch up, all the initiatives are being released, the funding has been re-released on certain things. It's a period of acceleration, and overload comes back in that new way. So with that comes all the distractions and drama that we left behind perhaps when it was action stations. But suddenly office politics are back, people are maneuvering, doing all that kind of stuff. And so whilst there is a new hope and people are getting excited about the future again, there's also a very new reality, right? It's the new normal cliche, but the fact is that it's not gone back to how it was before. And so at that point, there is a decision to make. Are we actually ready to recommit? Are we actually, or are we going to wait and hanker back to the past and say, oh, I'm going to wait for things to go back to as it was? Because in reality, it won't go back to how it was, right, after any kind of crisis. And so recommit really goes, okay, this is the new reality. Let's go with it. And it's the time when urgency comes back and the need to innovate and bring creativity and scale back fast comes. So these are three phases that they kind of mirror in some ways the grief cycle, right? These kind of things. We've simplified it down to three just to make it simpler to understand. But the point is, when you know where you are and where your team are, you could actually communicate in a way which is relevant to where they are. So let me just stop and perhaps again in the chat, which of these main phases do you feel that your organization is in right now? Which of these would you say that your team are going through right now? So react, reconfigure, or recommit. Again, if you're happy to type into chat, it'd be great just to get a pulse of that. Yeah, so some are in recommit, some are in reconfigure. Yeah, and you're right. Sometimes we go back to react, right? This is exactly right. These are shock waves, right? You can imagine it's a turbulent thing, and we can go back. So yeah, so a lot of recommitting and reconfiguring, but again, it's not always. Sometimes we go back, right? We hit back into react or reconfigure. So, so this is what's important as well. In some sense, is not to jump through, because reconfigure is pretty important. Let's talk about this now. So to simplify and reconfigure, we have. For me, it's really the difference between efficiency and effectiveness, right? So the first question I want to ask you, and if you've got a notepad, you might want to just jot down some ideas at this point. Let's just talk on the left-hand side of this, right? What is the core virtuous circle that drives your business or drives your organization's success or your department's success, if you like? So if you were to really boil it down to these are the key things that we do that reinforce each other and drive our business forward. What's that kind of core? I call it the cash flow engine or the business engine. For example, if you're in a consultancy business, you might say, well, generating customer referrals, expertise, and happy clients, right? Those are our three key things. So we generate referrals that allows us to enter new markets and new subjects, which builds our expertise, and expertise allows us to generate happy clients. Happy clients generate referrals. Okay, just one example. If you're in, say, a software as a service business, a very different sort of business, you might say our three habits, our three key processes are, driving free trials for our software, effectively onboarding people onto our platform, and then encouraging them to leave reviews, which then drives in turn more free trials and more onboarding and more reviews. You get the idea. The point is, in business, there's a whole lot of noise. And what I'd like to ask you is, what are those three key performance habits that are driving your business right now? If you can really boil those down, again, feel free to put them in the chat. Even just typing it up, writing it down actually makes it more real and allows you to consolidate this, right? It just seems like a concept. But when you start to think, in my business, what are those three things which we need, which are driving execution and driving performance? So that's the, if you like, that's the efficiency engine. Okay, and once we know that, we can start to optimize, you know, and we can start to really focus in. What's the key question we need to ask ourselves? There's a story about, it was a medal-winning boat rowing team. I can't remember which one it was. They had one question that everybody asked them for they asked themselves the entire time, pretty much the whole year. They lived by one question, and by doing this, they won the championship at the end of the year. They won gold. And the question they asked themselves was this: does it make the boat go faster? Right. So they're out in the evening. They want to order a pizza. Does it make the boat go faster? Right. They're looking at their watch at night. It's what time do they want to go to bed? Well, do I go to bed now or later? Well, does it make the boat go faster? Do we paint the boat? Does it make the boat go faster? Everything was around that one question. Clark's shoes, right? Do something similar. They have a question which is just very simply, does it sell shoes? Does it sell more shoes? And it's just this one filter on your decision-making process that allows you to really separate the wheat from the chaff. So you have this core execution engine. Then I want you to really think about no more than 3 strategic projects, which I'll define very precisely. These are 1 to 3 things which will make that engine on the left easier, more effective, and more powerful in, say, 90 days' time. Okay, so sometimes we have very ambitious strategic projects that are going to last multiple quarters and everything else. We'll break it down into something which you can do that generates value in your business in the next 90 days. So if it's a big project, well, what would be the short-term thing you could do in 90 days? Define it as a finish line. So what is that deliverable, right? What do you actually put into the business within 90 days? And if you can actually have no more than 3, and quite possibly just 1, alongside your operational concerns, if you keep doing that every quarter, and every quarter you just re-evaluate everything, all the possibilities, all the opportunities in your business, and you identify the 1 or 2 top finish lines that's going to build a new capability, a new relationship, a new asset into your business that drives that thing on the left, then you're actually taking away overload from people, you're creating focus, and you've simplified things that everyone can really see what's the engine and what's the upgrade that we're doing to the engine right now. So that was really the strategy question. Now I want to get on to this topic about the people, right? When we have an organization, how do we motivate them, keep them engaged, all these things? And there's a load we can say here, so perhaps we can do quite a lot in the Q&A. But I want to say, first of all, start with those 8 people or whatever it is in your leadership team. Transform first and then multiply. So the good news is you don't need to worry at this stage about how do I change my entire organization, right? How do I roll it out to my whole organization? Because if your leadership team is not motivated, energized, and engaged, then their teams are not going to be engaged, right? And their teams as teams are not going to be engaged and motivated. So the good news is focus in first of all on creating something within your team that is a model, and then second phase is multiply that across the business. Okay, so we probably haven't got time today to talk about how you do the multiplication part, but let's talk about how you actually work on your team. I always like to say no organization can be healthier than your number 1 team. Okay, so how do we actually work on the team? Well, when I work with executive teams, I often find that people say that, Richard, I have a team of high performers. They're all good, they all know their stuff, but we're not really working as a team. We're not really a high-performing team. We're just a load of individual people who are really good and we come together. And so often when they come to me, they'll say, Richard, how do we do that? Well, I actually try to reconfigure that, because I think the problem with high performing is it actually assumes some kind of constant set of rules that you're playing by. And it can also focus on optimizing your team at the expense of everything else. What I actually like to talk about is what would be a high value creating team look like? Okay, a team that knows how to add value to all its different stakeholders continually and to adapt to the changing rules of the game. And there are really 5 key elements of this, and they all interrelate. So as I go through these, see where your team is lacking. Okay, see which is the number 1 constraint that's perhaps affecting everything else, because one of these will be undermining the other parts. Okay, so the first one is clarity and motivation, right? Do we know why we're here? Do we know our mandate as a team? And are we on a mission that matters? And are we personally committed to that? Number 2, internal operations. Are we working effectively? If clarity is about, we know the clear goals that we're after, we know what success looks like. Internal operations is, are we able to achieve that? Do we know how to work effectively together? Do we have the roles and responsibilities in place, the systems and the processes? Are team meetings working well? These kind of things. Relationships, right? How are our relationships doing? In lockdown or when we're virtually, what happens in relationships is often they get incredibly transactional, right? You've probably all done it. You get on your video call, your web call, and there's a bit of silence to start with, the occasional awkward, isolated sentence between colleagues, but mainly a lot of tapping away on keyboards as people do their emails. And then a couple of minutes later, the conversation starts. And you get straight into business, and you've lost all of that context, all of the, hey, how was the weekend? How are the kids? What went on last night? All that kind of chit chat that forms relationships. So in a virtual world, there's a real danger of it becoming incredibly transactional. So a very practical tip at this point, if you're hosting a web meeting, really act like your best party host, right? As people come on, right? Be there early. As they come on, welcome them, engage with them, stimulate conversation across the team, and really spend a few minutes just focused on social niceties, right? Just being interested in what's going on outside of work. And then at the right time, but you'll probably have to lead that conversation, right? It won't happen by itself. And then after a few minutes, 2 or 3 minutes, you can then say, okay, guys, let's move on and deal with business. But you've actually preserved and created a space for those relationships to build up. Now, that's not the only thing you can do, of course, but I see that that's often a thing we just forget to do it because we know the agenda of the meeting and we drive straight into the task. So what else? External interfaces. One thing I see in lockdown, and in this kind of remote working situation, is that teams might often do all sorts of creative things to stay engaged with each other. They'll do team happy hours or whatever it is, but they're not paying attention to the external interfaces of the team, the stakeholders, the other teams in the organization, perhaps clients or prospects or suppliers or regulators or other people, right? But very often it's just other colleagues, other teams are not getting that same amount of attention. And yet, high value creating teams pay extraordinary attention to the interfaces between them and the rest of the world, because that is where you create a lot of the value. And then finally, learning. I always ask my clients, especially when we're working as teams, it's like, as a team, how are you getting better at getting better? Are you learning faster than your competitors? Are you learning faster than the rate of change in the market? Are you just so focused on the tasks that you're not stepping back and looking at how we're being a team, how we're operating, and where the opportunities are? So these are 5 areas, and you can see that they all interrelate. Okay, so let's say that relationships is taking a hit. Okay, then actually that your ability to engage in productive conflict around process design, around team priorities, that will take a hit, right? You know, the degree to which you want to collaborate together and are motivated to work together will take a hit, right? The degree that you can build partnerships outside of the team will take a hit, right? Your ability to share knowledge and learn as a team will take a hit. So overall, it starts to feel that the whole team feels more shaky, but it's helpful to try to think about where is the biggest opportunity to shore up or to strengthen this team dynamic. So I think, Helena, I think you've got a poll that we could perhaps do at this point, because I'd love to understand, out of these 5 areas, which would you consider to be the #1 barrier facing your leadership team right now? So if you can go ahead and choose one of the 5 that hopefully have popped up on your screen. That'd be great. Helena, do we have a decent number of people there having completed that?
Got about 86% voted.
Okay, that's probably good. You might need to.
Okay, I'll launch the results.
Great, thank you. Okay, so you can see here that so clarity and motivation, external interfaces, and relationships are all coming up, right? This is interesting, right? Because at the start of lockdown, what I was seeing was, yeah, clarity and motivation had taken a hit, and relationships had taken a really big hit. But I think what we're seeing, at least on this call, is that whilst those are still issues, we're actually thinking about how do we work externally is really important. So let me just give a suggestion. One second. Yeah, so what I was going to suggest was one way to really focus on external interfaces is to really have a discussion with the team. And first of all, and this can actually also impact clarity and motivation. So generally motivation comes when a team remembers who it is that it's serving. So when I start coaching teams, I tend to, in the first session, to ask them things like this. You know, why does our team exist, right? Who would care if we weren't there, right? Who is counting on us to deliver? And really think a bit about that question, right? It's going to be this: the management, managers are going to count, the staff are going to count, there's customers, right, are going to have an interest, and really start to understand, what is it that they are relying on us to do? And then so what you do there is you actually start to get some motivation, because people are really connecting what they do to other people. And the second thing it does is it allows you to really start to think about, well, how do the next question is, well, we now see who our stakeholders are. How can we better interact with them, right? What would be a great result with our key stakeholders in the next month? So I would suggest just a simple conversation like that to open up the discussion and to get the team speaking about less about what it's doing and more about how it's doing it. Another area which touches on relationships and motivation and an overall impact of the team is to really go where it's easiest, right? And leverage the inherent motivations of individuals and of the team in order to release discretionary effort. So it turns out that individually we all have certain ways in which we basically want to have an impact in the business. So I use a framework called the GC Index with a lot of my clients on this. It really measures the impact you want to make in a business. So some people love coming up with creating new ideas, right? New left field, out of the box, game-changing ideas for the business. Okay, we call that the game changer. Other people love making sense of that, putting it into a plan, strategizing, prioritizing, figuring out which of those ideas are really worth implementing, and really understanding why are we doing this. That's what we call the strategist profile. And then the implementer is really people who are just want to get things done, right? Get things over the finish line, take those strategies and turn them into success. And then the polisher, people who are polishers bring that sense of quality. They want continual improvement. Nothing's ever going to be good enough, right? You can always make things better. You can never rest on your laurels. There's always a way to make things better, higher standard, and create a real advantage for the long term. And then we have people in the middle who really are less focused on their own agendas and their own ideas, and more on how do we actually get everybody working together so that everybody finds a win in this, how that everybody is achieving their own sense of success and making their own results count. In general, we find that we can kind of score people against all 5 of these criteria. And the advantage of this, and you can use other tools, but I find this one's really good because it's business language, it's really clear, it's really simple, and it's nuanced because there's like 100,000 variants of the different scores that you can get. But what it allows you to do is to actually understand where individuals most want to have an impact in the business, which is the view on the left here. So you can see the person on the left is a high strategist implementer, right? So they love taking ideas, structuring them, planning them, figuring out what's the highest impact result, and then going and making it happen. They're not so concerned afterwards to actually continue to innovate on top of that, but they'd rather move on to the next idea and the next plan. So that profile is going to be something very different from, say, a game changer or a playmaker in the middle there. When you actually put people in the seats where they can actually create the kind of impact that they naturally want to do, you find that people suddenly light up. And equally on a team level, if you realize that teams are getting frustrated because situations have changed and perhaps they can no longer do the things that they have energy for. So this, the middle one is a team profile driven by a high amount of creativity and getting things done. So if this was like a development team in a tech company, it'd be great, right? They would have lots of crazy, new ideas, innovating new ideas for the product, and then would get them implemented, okay? But if this was a strategy team, or perhaps a customer service team, you'd be pretty worried, right? Or at least you'd be considering, well, they're not necessarily playing to their strengths as a team. And so this is a really powerful tool because in this time when we don't get together and we are lacking the informal way of understanding where everybody's coming from, actually having some kind of more formalized language, language always creates culture. So when you start to use language to help people understand how they can work better with each other, how they can actually have the biggest impact themselves in the business, then that can be fantastic. And so we're finding that in this period where people aren't together, actually having this language is allowing teams to understand how do they deploy their resources in a complementary way for greater business impact. So I really believe a lot in this. It's not my own product, but I'm a partner of this company. I do a lot with them. And so if I've managed to negotiate the 8 complimentary assessments and debriefings for IOD members. So if you'd like one of those free assessments, then do drop me an email and we can talk about how we could set that up. But whether or not you do that and whether or not you use this tool, I guess what my point is here is now's the time again to step back from the task a little bit for a second and slow down, to speed up and connect with, well, where do people really want to make an impact in the business right now? And how can we actually align what people are doing with where they have energy? Because in some ways, people have used up a lot of energy this year, right? And we need to find ways to put them back into their sweet spot. Now let's move on to you. Leaders define the culture. I think, as somebody said at the very start, my team aren't that motivated, but to be quite frankly, I'm not that motivated as well. Okay, I've seen that a bit in my own clients. So again, the first thing I would say is just check in with yourself. Who is it that's counting on you in your team? Probably your team members, might be other people as well, clients and other people. And just realize who you are for them, right? You're an important person who's going to shape their life, their working week, their business. I want to offer you a tool for you to be the leader that you need to be in this time. So we've covered strategy, we've covered the team side to some degree. Let's talk about what culture we are creating right now with our team. Okay. Now, I love, again, this is language. You'll see that I use a lot of language, simple tools like this, right? Support and challenge, because language creates culture. And as a leader, you are creating the culture in your team right now. And culture is really established over the medium term, right? So generally, if you were to ask people on your team about how they experience your leadership, what would they say? And generally, it's a mixture of support and challenge, right? So challenge is all about the deadlines, the tasks, the action plans, you know, the gap, right? What needs to be done, the gap perhaps between what the expectations and reality. It's about having the direct challenge to push people on and drive results and increase performance. Support, on the other hand, is the relational component. It's caring about the other person, showing that you care about them beyond their ability just to produce for you. It's being able to encourage them, knowing about who they are, right? Their personal constraints and how that's perhaps impacting them at work. It's actually having a relationship of compassion and caring personally. And the thing is, on a good day, we can perhaps bring both. But when the stress is on, when we're tired, when we're distracted, we'll tend to fall back to our default patterns of behavior. And normally we tend to be good either at support or at challenge, but never really both, right? We can learn the other one, but when we fall back, when we're not paying attention, we'll go back to our default. So for some of us, perhaps if we're more introverted, actually our response, you know, or our default pattern can actually be to withdraw, right? We're actually better in our own head, trying to solve the problems by ourselves in our own world. And so our team can experience that as a kind of abdicator culture, that where actually there's not a lot of support, the boss is never around, they're never really showing much interest in us, and there's not much challenge. We're just kind of left to our own devices. And so you create this culture of apathy and inertia. Right, it's just boring. People are just disengaged. Some of us are great at challenge, and that comes naturally to us, and we're very task focused. And the danger is that when we're under stress, perhaps the level of support that we bring to our team goes down, and we start to create this dominator culture, which is basically, it's all about the task, it's all about people as units of production and of delivery. People start to feel, you know, the boss doesn't really care about who I am. I'm just a pawn on their chessboard. And the game becomes one of survival and compliance, keeping your head down, obeying the boss, not really bringing your heart, your own innovations, your own ideas. You get compliance, but not commitment in this zone. Now, some of us will actually say, no, I'm great at support. I'm a people person. You know, I can build warm relationships. People like being on my team. I create this warm, nurturing environment for my team. And yet, when the stress is on, perhaps the challenge doesn't happen. Perhaps the hard conversations are not had. Perhaps the gap between what we thought, you know, what we expected and what actually was delivered, perhaps we haven't really had the hard conversation about that. Perhaps behaviors that are not appropriate are getting unchallenged. And so it feels cozy on the outside, but underneath people know that there are issues that are not being dealt with and the truth is not being said. And so you get this kind of sunny stagnation of yellow. You know, it's a dependency culture. It's the kind of place where often it's like everyone's saying it's great, it's great, it's great, and then you're fired, right? Because performance issues haven't been dealt with. Excuse me. And so you get the insulator culture. And then when we can actually bring support and challenge consistently, we create activator culture. Okay, activator culture is when you know that somebody is on your side, they care about you as a person, and yet they're prepared to give you a good kick up the backside when you need it and push you to be the best you can be. And that when you're going through that steep learning curve of a new challenge, they'll be there to encourage and support and provide guidance and affirmation. And we all know what it's like when we have that kind of manager or that kind of figure in our life. We've all had one, probably a parent, a mentor, a boss, a scout leader, whatever it is. So my challenge to you is just to have a think right now as to where are you on this? Perhaps most people, you know, well, a lot of people will say, you know, on a good day, yeah, I can be an activator, but when the pressure's on, you know, I probably fall back to my default, and that's probably dominator or insulator, or whatever. So I'd just like to ask, again, Helen's got a little poll. I'm going to say, when you're not paying attention, when you're under stress, which of these quadrants will you tend to end up in? And if you say activator, I'd ask you to just double check, is that really? I mean, 'cause that's amazing, right? If even when you're under pressure, you fall back to that, that's great. I tend to find that most people, when they dig a bit deeper, realize that they perhaps fall back to a slightly less helpful quadrant. I know for myself, I'm a high challenge person, so my risk is to end up being all task focused, right? Going into that dominator quadrant and not, and just driving people hard and trying to get results done. So again, have a think about yourself. Do we have
just a couple more votes coming in.
Okay. Well, as those are coming in, let me just jump to this next slide, which is a very practical thing to do about it, right? So how do you actually maintain this idea of being an activator leader even when the pressure's on? Okay, this is my little image: steering wheel, accelerator, and a brake. You can just apply this in with your team. Like at the start of every week, just drop down people in your team and say, for each person, do they need some more support from me right now, or do they need more challenge? And what specifically would that look like? Perhaps somebody's needs a strong piece of challenge, right, about the last piece of work they delivered, or about they need a bigger goal, or they need some extra, they need a hard conversation, or possibly they need support from you. They need more time. They need more help, and they need some personal interest. And then also ask you, perhaps to generate those answers, ask yourself, what's holding them back? And what's their next level? What's their potential? And if you just start to ask yourself those questions and then translate them into what's the support that they need right now and what's the challenge, then you'll be on the way to create that consistent activator culture despite all the pressures. Helena, let's see the results. There we go. So almost half of us owning up to that challenge, the high challenge tendency. And I think this is actually quite interesting because generally it's about 50-50 between people who are being more support and people who are being more challenge. So I kind of wonder actually whether the subject of this webinar might actually have brought along a higher proportion of people who are more about the task and the challenge, right? So perhaps the observation there would be just to think about what would it look like for me just to be a little bit less task focused with my team, and step back, perhaps go back to that team dynamics model and just to get a bit more curious, right, about, hey guys, how can we become more of a learning team, right? Like, what do we need to shift in the way that we relate to each other, and actually slow down just from like driving the performance for like one meeting. Have those discussions, or on your one-to-ones, just get a bit more interesting in what motivates you, because so often when we're in the dominator mode, we're driven by our own targets and our own goals and objectives. And it's almost the harder we push in dominator mode, the more distant the team start to be, and the more we feel that we're the only one carrying the whole vision for the company. So try this activator framework out as just a way to bring you back to this balanced leadership model. I know time is ticking on, so let me just summarize where we've got to today. And there's a huge amount of things we could have talked about, obviously. So the first thing is help your people understand these shock waves. Because when we understand that this is not a bizarre thing that we're feeling, but it's a normal process, then people kind of relax. And also helps them lead with their teams. And it helps you relate to them where they are. But help them understand those shock waves. The second one is just to note that you can't change gears when your foot is on the accelerator. Sometimes we need to slow down to speed up, and I would really recommend thinking about what are the commitments that I've committed us to as an organization. Do we actually have the time and energy and attention to really deliver on all those commitments? And if not, what's the top 20%? How do we drive our 3 most important disciplines in the business to drive results? And what are the 1, 2, or 3 finish lines that are going to build capabilities into the business this quarter? It's just an example. For me, one of my finish lines for my own business, a while back was launching, my podcast, right? Another one would be, rolling out a new marketing campaign, right? Another one would be bringing on a new, a couple of team members or whatever it is. So it's really things which are very measurable, very concrete, and that makes everything else easier. What's that for you this quarter? And then when it comes to your team, the challenge is shift from task orientation to value creation, right? The ceiling of complexity that you'll be hitting will be just trying to be the super manager, driving more and more tasks done with the team. And in fact, we need to step back and release the motivation from the team itself. That's why a tool like the GC Index is a great way of doing that, because it helps you and them understand where they most want to make a difference. And then finally, be the leader that people want to follow. Be that activator leader, and make sure that despite the stresses, you actually serve them by bringing support and challenge in the right quantities. I'll finish there. Here are 3 ways you can kind of go a bit deeper on some of these topics. The first one is if you want the slides, and I've also attached to that another resource I developed called the Challenging Times Checklist, which are 6 kind of core strategies and 17 specific ideas for leading through complex, challenging times. You can get that at the link you see, xquadrant.com/go/IOD. Also, feel free to check out my podcast. We're really going into there about how do you create more impact with less time as a CEO or the senior leader. And then if you're interested in just speaking, I'm always happy to talk with people, roll up my sleeves, talk about your business, talk about the GC Index, whatever you want. So feel free to contact me if that would be an appropriate thing to do. That was the presentation. I would love to see whether people have any questions or comments. I know there's so much we could have coped with. An hour, you can only do so much. If you've got any questions, please do type them into the chat or just come off mute and ask me directly. I'd be happy to take a couple of questions in the few minutes we have left.